We are time, since we consist of time. Time determines our existence. When the time is right, we are born, and when the time has passed, we die. Occasionally, time plays a game with itself, and events from the past or the future are suddenly visible in parallel universes. Lives intertwine. Age, wisdom, and understanding become interchangeable, easily allowing children to adopt the roles of adults, and vice versa. That is the gist of this history, which has been observed in one universe from the perspective of another. It's the story of a beautiful otherworldly foundling and an ingenious outsider. A tale of love, hate, envy, ignorance, and the inevitability of fate. In short, a history that concerns life itself.
I'm about to tell you a story. Taking things one step at a time, we'll start with the first universe. My universe, the time in which I lived. Janis Put Sawa is my name. I was born in 1744 and lost my parents at a young age. For that reason, I grew up with my uncle Rai Put Sawa, a renowned astronomer. Obsessed with everything that went on up in the sky, my uncle had built an observatory between the years 1727 and 1734. This comprised a collection of structures that made it possible to make precise astronomical measurements. At an early age, I was already learning everything about the universe. Following in my uncle's footsteps, I developed a system for astronomical calculations that enabled me, due to the stable and continuous advance of time, to interpret the future on the basis of the present. From Earth, we see in the heavens stars that became extinct eons ago. When we gaze at the sky, we're looking back in time, and in relation to those bygone stars, we are the future. While reading about the history of the star system, I came across incidents from the past and connected those with the events that had not yet taken place. I began to understand why history repeats itself and why incidents from the past can bear a resemblance to events that have yet to occur. Soon I was surrounded by a group of followers who listened avidly to my words. We met frequently and told each other about our experiences. I showed my followers their capacities and shared, in turn, the hidden wisdom that I had acquired through my profound study of the universe. I taught them when to be big and strong, and pointed out the moments when it would be best for them to remain small and inconspicuous. Sometimes the situation requires us to recede into the background and anticipate the moment. When the moment arrives, we appear out of nowhere and strike. With relentless strength, we then restore the balance between good and evil. That's our mission. At some moments, we were called the Brotherhood of the Good. At others, the Gang of Evil. I dressed mainly in white, and my pals tended to wear black. But when the fire of evil would ignite, I disguised myself in red and made myself big. Our gatherings usually took place at sunrise, around the collection of astrological structures near the harbor of Kota Raksasa, where the tops of the waves glittered like slivers of gold leaves swaying in the wind. At other times we met each other in the dead of night, in a nearby forest where the air was warm and sultry. Dark outlines formed by monster-like trees seemed to move in the bright moonlight. There we danced, and we sang, and we cried out along the animals that came to life at night. Wolves howled with us, and we were drowned out by the chorus of frogs and crickets. Life is a game, both rugged and refined. It is beautiful and dirty, unpredictable and contradictory. Beneath the perfect picture lies chaos, continual day-to-day choices, confusing and often irreversible. The machine goes on, and time never stops. It simply races forward. Precisely when you think you've made it and everything seems great, suddenly something happens out the blue. Nothing is etched in stone. A feather, held aloft by the wind, dances and darts about on its currents. Then all at once the gust comes along, and the feather is gone, cast into the rapids of a river, caught in waves that sweep it away into an unknown future. After these encounters, we set off to straighten things out and then vanished into oblivion. I studied as much as I could, anytime and anywhere. I was learning not necessarily to predict the future, but to calculate changes, which I arranged into a systematic order. This allowed me to anticipate what, logically speaking, might take place. My calculations became increasingly precise and detailed, and at a certain point, I could even reason forward in time. This is how I came across the following love story, a stormy affair that takes place in the year 2088. The record of this, written down in classically fluid handwriting, begins somewhat puzzlingly, but soon the words come together to form this compelling tale. Forgive my ceremonious use of language and my old-fashioned looking handwriting. This is simply how we spoke and wrote in my time, in my universe. This story, which takes place in another universe, has been determined by me on the basis of the positions of the stars. And I say to you that your choices can counter the supposed obviousness of any moment in an unknown future. There will come a time, however, when those choices too become part of the past, mirrored by the stars in a vast and all-encompassing universe. My calculations thus pointed without a doubt to this tale involving Patro the aristocrat with only one name, Rikin Sifo Abadan, Kondom Nikin Sanko Pekka, their friends and dissemblers in what I call the second universe.
Dusk descended upon the Asiatic metropolis of Kota Raksasa, the city of the future, a haven where east meets west. The sunset created a palette of colors in the sky. Glass in the city's architecture reflected the setting sun and tinged it with hues ranging from magenta to deep purple. It was the hour when day people vanished from the streets and the night folks emerged. Patro, the man known in Raksasa as the aristocrat with only one name, took a daily stroll. Occasionally he would wander through the forest that surrounded the city, but this time he opted to follow a route through the city's poorest neighborhoods. Little was known about him. People had no idea where this loner came from or how he had acquired his wealth. He had gained a reputation as the mysterious philanthropist who made large sums of money available to the poor. He also supported special projects in the city. Extravagant parties were held by him at high-priced locations, but he himself never took part in them. His life was a solitary one. Nobody in the city had ever visited his house. The loner commanded great respect. His fame was so considerable among the rich as well as the poor that he had little to fear at this moment of the day. Should anyone dare to harass him, that person risked being cornered by admirers who could be found in every level of society. The nightly riffraff moved aside for him and muttered as they watched him pass. Patro sought calm in the desolate industrial zone near the Backstreet district. Dilapidated machines in the abandoned warehouses reminded him of the industrial age, when small-scale workplaces developed into big factories. Workmen who once bustled back and forth here were now gone, and all that could be heard were the ghostly sounds of animals and insects that had taken over these vacant warehouses. Patro's footsteps echoed in the vast expanses, heightening the sense of desolation. Every step resonated in the silence of his thoughts and filled him with inner calm. He had chosen to lead a solitary existence. Serenity suited him. No needless words, no pointless conversations. A simple life. A life free of interaction with restless mankind. Little did he know that this would soon come to an end. Suddenly, a howl resounded through the space. He could sense a pair of eyes piercing into his back. Slowly, he turned and looked over his shoulder. There on the floor lay a newborn wolf. Its white fur was shining with the light cast in. Carefully, Patro walked over to the timid creature that appeared to be exhausted. The yelping subsided, and two big eyes stared at him. Sparkling pale eyes that seemed to reflect eternity. That gaze moved him. Cautiously, he began to pet the helpless animal. He grumbled agreeably. Patro tucked the animal under his arm and left the warehouse. Every day the sunset offered a spectacle of color to the people of Kota, Raksasa. Clouds blazed with shades of yellowish orange and dark violet reds. For Patro, the aristocrat with only one name, it was his favorite time of the day to take a walk. This time he decided to treat his lungs to clean air in the densely overgrown forest where monkeys, birds, and all sorts of other animals welcomed him with a deafening racket. It was never quiet there. Just as the day people would vanish from the streets in the city in order to make way for the night folks, the animals that kept things lively during the day lay down to rest while nocturnal animals came to life. Patro enjoyed seeing how dusk extinguished the daylight with a rich variety of colors, how the sky's glow at sunset gradually became a deep blue in which thousands of stars began to sparkle. All sorts of mysteries unfolded at night, sounds unfamiliar to the ear, silhouettes of passing shadows in the moonlight. Fear and fearlessness mingled in a ghostly atmosphere of enchantment. Patro heard a noise that stood out from the choir of tropical sounds. Was it his imagination? Or was this animal that cried like a newborn baby a cat in distress? He walked over to the spot where the noise was coming from. It was dark, he could barely see anything. The roots of an enormous banyan tree encompassed the creature as though Mother Earth had just given birth to it. Patro leaned forward and carefully pushed the roots apart. The whining stopped, and two large eyes peered at him. Like those of the young wolf found in a factory a few days earlier, these eyes seemed to reflect age-old wisdom. Once again he was moved. Patro took off his coat, wrapped the fragile naked creature in the garment and held it in his arms. Exhausted, it closed its eyes. Its breathing could hardly be heard. Its little head dropped to one side and life was on the verge of leaving the frail body. Carrying the foundling wrapped warmly in his coat, Patro left the forest. As a clap of thunder rang out, the skies opened and dropped buckets of water down on the streets. With a brisk step, Patro headed home.
My sincere apologies, my friends. I had to interrupt my account of this history for a time, for the circumstances of life cannot always be anticipated, as I myself have experienced. For after all, being occupied with the calculation of passing time and what might happen in the future, even I can become confused about what is happening right now. and what has yet to happen. Complications beyond my power obliged me to make this delay, for which I ask you for forgiveness. I needed to find clarity about what the universe I myself inhabited. But now I shall proceed, onward, if only due to the fact that I myself will inevitably become entangled in the intrigues and complications of the cursed second universe. There, in Kota Raksasa, the international seaport bustling with trade, a place of anchorage, of coming and going, of people who perhaps should never have arrived here.
A big ship had come to the harbour of Kota Raksasa. Refugees, families and lone travellers disembarked in a city totally foreign to them. Strangers could feel quite lost here, surrounded by the commotion of cargo being loaded and unloaded, dock workers shouting, traffic coming and going, that melting pot of industriousness and swarms of people. A young man stepped ashore. His clothes were threadbare and full of holes. Travelling light, he had a duffel bag thrown over his shoulder and was firmly clutching a small suitcase to his chest. As the rain poured down at nightfall, he surveyed the surroundings. While hastily passing this young man, Patro nearly knocked him over. The suitcase fell open and dozens of little pieces of equipment scattered across the street. As his words became louder and sharper, the youth angrily gathered up the instruments. These were his sole possessions, a collection of peculiar gadgets whose purpose was anything but evident. Not a soul could guess what these mysterious objects would soon bring him fame and fortune. Soaking wet, he sought shelter for the night beneath the city's arches. Rats and other vermin crept along the walls. Burning here and there were fires where drifters gathered to dry off in the damp tunnels of the metropolis. The boy looked about anxiously, in search of a sheltered spot where he could rest quietly. In his fatigue, he failed to notice that he was being followed. It had been a long journey. As a stowaway, he had managed to avoid being noticed as the ship traveled past various continents. He was convinced that he could make his dream come true in Kota Raksasa, since this was a city where anything was possible. True enough, he had no money, nor had he ever attended university, but he did have a wealth of knowledge at his disposal. Everything he knew was based on life experience and a capacity for keen observation. He had a talent for making logical connections among nature's riches, and he managed to combine mechanics and digital operating systems into instruments that could make life a great deal more pleasant. Wandering about from one refuse depot to another, he collected materials for his inventions, and with his workmanship he developed from this industrial waste a series of devices that needed only to be tested yet. Raksasa struck him as being just the right place for this, as the city was inhabited by people from all corners of the earth. The young man was certain that he would find volunteers for testing his experimental equipment. Although he had concern for mankind and wanted to contribute to the welfare of all with his inventions, he was not apt to trust people. That was the paradoxical aspect of his character. He wanted to serve humanity and yet basically trusted no one at all. Having never known his parents, he grew up among vagabonds. Because of his determination and willpower, his comrades called him Sifo. It was the only name ever given to him. On the day that he took leave of the trusted drifters, he called out, "Farewell, friends! My name is Sifo! Recount Sifo Abadan! I am departing poor, but will be rich on my return." Tired from the long journey, he fell into a deep, sleep. On returning home, Patro requested that his servants draw a warm bath, prepare a room, and set up a small bed in it. The entire staff had been thrown into confusion, but asked no questions. Everyone acted as instructed. Patro insisted that the foundling share a room with the young wolf that he had discovered in the industrial area shortly before. If they would grow up together and be together throughout their entire development, from infancy to adulthood, she would have a good friend. While wolves are difficult to tame, they are generally kind to children and more loyal than dogs. Patro noticed something special about the wolf cub. Its behavior was unusual, as if it possessed a supernatural quality, a hypersensitivity to its environment. When it was still blind and deaf, as all newborn wolves are, it seemed to be aware of everything due to heightened intuitive powers that were much stronger than its sense of smell. Its pale, blind eyes seemed to reflect a knowledge of the universe.
I can tell you now that Patro was right. This wolf was a special creature. The question is, however, whether the animal actually existed. Might Patro have read about the animal in the bestiary, the book on mythical creatures that he had pored over time and again in his library? Perhaps the cub was the product of his imagination, and the powers that he ascribed to the animal were based on his wish to protect the foundling from all the suffering and evil that plagued the world.
Once the room had been prepared, Patro withdrew to his private quarters. That night he had a remarkable vision. In a kind of trance, the young woman was making her way through the breezy forest, followed by a white wolf. The wolf carefully watched every step she took. Trees were forming new buds, and just as she passed them, they burst open. It was an amazing sight. She stared ahead with unseeing eyes. It was as though she was gradually waking from a deep sleep, unaware where she came from or where she was heading. Everything around her came to life and flourished. She had been born of Mother Earth and gave shape to the forest. She was the forest. Her complete surroundings were born again. Was this an illusion? Improbability verges on the real, creating confusion. Like a vision from a dream lingering asleep slowly gives way to wakeful consciousness. Leaves rustled back and forth in the wind, faintly giving shape to the words, "Condamnita sens culpa." The forest seemed to be whispering that name to her. At the top of the mountain, rising up from the earth, like a dark shadow south of the city Kota Raksasa, there is an archway in the rock that provides access to a cave. From the entrance to the cavern, the view of the city is magnificent. It offers a view of the harbor and the waterway, the lifeline that connects the metropolis to the rest of the world. Here, one can see how the city developed like a web around the mooring. In the cave it is quiet, except for the flapping of a bird gone astray and an occasional drop of water trickling down along the cool stones. In fact, it is so quiet there that one can hear one's own heartbeat.
My friends, once again I must interrupt my story. For years I've been coming to this place in order to concentrate on my astronomical calculations and give calculated facts a place and time. Since I have been occupied with this love story, the scenic view from the cave across the rivers and woods surrounding the mountains seems to have given way to a gradually rising architecture of Kota Raksasa. Each time I visited the cave, new buildings had appeared as the city grew into a veritable metropolis. It confused me, as if the dimensions in which I existed had shifted, as if I were traveling from one universe to another. I let out a heavy sigh and could hear my breathing reverberate against the granite walls. I could spend hours here. My thoughts vanished in the immersed void brought by the silence in my mind. Reaching the cave was difficult. The path that led to it was perilous. A narrow ledge with little footing, stone crumbled with every step and vanished into the depths. The entrance to the cave was a gaping pitch-black hole that made all sorts of fantasies lurk in one's mind. What could one expect to find in there? Whenever I spent time in there, I would be overwhelmed by remarkable visions, apparitions that far surpassed anything I could read in the stars. Demons, mythological animals, all sorts of things passed in review. It didn't upset me though. I just sat there, not moving a muscle, for hours on end. It seemed as though my astronomical calculations touched on a deeper level in this cave. In my observations, I kept on coming across new mysteries of the universe. As soon as I thought I had found an answer, another question would arise. It didn't matter how deeply I delved into the subject. Time and again I would get tangled up in new mysteries. There was no end to the unknown. It simply kept on shifting in perpetual movement. My single-mindedness in wanting to fathom everything sometimes led to months of brooding. My friends, it was awful. From the unknown, there was nothing to gain but more mystery. Eventually, I began calling the unknown nothing, the non-material, nothingness. The more I came to know, the more I realized how limited my knowledge was. The unknown verged, in my view, on the divine. Isn't the unknown synonymous with what we refer to as deity? At birth, we have no knowledge of where we came from. When we die, we don't understand where we are going. There are speculations on this, but what use are these? What really matters is the road that lies between the two. Conjecture and assumption lead only to the path of misery, to expectations, illusions, disappointments, delusions, and other such absurdities. From the beginning to the end, all is puzzling and mysterious. One big adventure full of wonder. If we could look back at the whole of it, from the end back to the beginning, life would be less mysterious, and it would become clear to us that everything happens for a reason. A lack of knowledge allows for neutrality. In the unknown, there is no distinction between one thing and another. As soon as we begin to make distinctions, divisions arise. These can lead to an intolerance. How many wars have been fought because of this? Is it not divine to know absolutely nothing? To have no urge to understand anything, and thus have no desire at all for answers anymore? To live at rock bottom, from one moment to the next, profoundly united with ignorance? During one of the moments that I spent in the mountaintop cave south of the seaport Kota Raksasa, I had a vision that I would like to share with you. Droplets trickled down along the walls of the cave and pattered onto its floor. In the overwhelming silence, the spatters sounded like sledgehammer blows, and yet nothing bothered me. I was in another world, another universe. My corporality had given way to another manifestation. The image that I saw embodied the duality of masculine and the feminine elements in me. The more deeply I experienced what was going on, the more the duality transformed into a perfect balance. Neither man nor woman, and yet both man and woman. In the beginning, I shifted back and forth between the two in my imagination, but little by little this fluctuation subsided. A stray bird flew past my head, just missing it, but I was completely absorbed in my illusion. Someone could have shot off a cannon next to my head. I simply just sat there, and it seemed an eternity before I came around. I knew that throughout my life I would follow, in my timeless observation, the woman whom I'd seen in my vision and support her whenever I could. After all, I had transcended time and was able to interpret across centuries. In this dream, the seed of lasting trust had been planted. Unconditional loyalty was established. My vision in the cave made me realize that I would take this woman under my wing. I would take on the demons that tormented her, the evil spirits that threatened her. This woman was pure innocence. Nothing could be allowed to taint that. My followers and I would take harsh measures if anything were to happen to her. We would travel through time and dimensions. We would surpass tangible presence simply by appearing in the imagination and the consciousness. This is how I became acquainted with time travel. I was like a god among demons and would protect this remarkable woman from evil. The forest where Patro so often enjoyed the sunset in silence was now alive with celebration. Things were getting rowdy, in contrast to the atmosphere at dusk. With my pals, I danced away in the dead of night. Noise galore. We sang and jumped. Crickets chirped, frogs croaked, wolves howled, bats squeaked, owls screeched. The entire forest was in a state of commotion. We shouted away our fright, our demons. Everyone has ideas of what kind of things wander about in these dark, ghostly woods, and what might be creeping through the undergrowth. Such go from bad to worse when they have free reign. Devils, demons, and tormenting spirits come instantly to life in fantasies. Before long, they are Beelzebub, Lucifer, Mephisto, each a prince of darkness rising from deeply rooted fear. Together we warded off evil and celebrated good with all our hearts, so genuinely that the forest was transformed into a nocturnal amusement park, illuminated by twinkling stars and the moon's bright light slashing through the branches. For now, this was no place for tormentors. It was time for wild pandemonium. We had quite some share of it. This wasn't necessarily a matter of bravura, but more of a triumph over anxieties that could lead to agonizing panic. With every full moon, we congregated in the woods and celebrated our release from all our oppression and doom. We gathered the strength and energy to combat the city's wrongs and to prevent as many as possible in the future. After all, I could read the stars and was able to predict many things that would happen. My friends, even though I was evidently not tied to space or time and could move freely from one universe to another, I appeared to be unable to change certain circumstances. My painstaking calculations and my intuition were not always infallible, and my actions were not always sufficiently bold. At times I lingered in the first universe and had to witness, in silent resignation, what went on in the second universe. Or I encountered cases that had unprecedented significance and purpose, and unavoidable incidents occurred. That's when things were not as they appeared to be. This made me feel powerless, since I had witnessed something that I could not interpret or influence. Fate took command, Any shift or intervention would have resulted in yet larger series of ill-fated consequences and caused precisely that which I was attempting to prevent. That's how it went sometimes. Just when I thought I had everything under control, I lost sight of the whole. A greater power. Destiny cannot be meddled with.
On the day that Sifo had arrived in Kota Raksasa as a stowaway, he had been knocked over by Patro, the aristocrat with only one name, who was rushing home in the pouring rain with the just-discovered foundling in his arms. "Sorry, my friend, I shall send someone to help you," Patro called out. The creature on the verge of dying was wrapped in his coat. After Sifo had gathered up his collection of mysterious instruments, he checked to see if anything was damaged and dried off each one carefully. Then he set out to find a dry spot in the city's subterranean foundations. Patro was concerned about the fate of the poor soul whom he had left behind on the ground in his haste. He had sent one of his servants to lend him a discreet helping hand. The armed servant had followed Sifo to his shelter and was watching over the exhausted boy there. The city's underground world was not without danger. Rumor had it that people were killed there for a mere quarter. Sifo woke up early the next morning. With tired eyes he peered at the servant, who gave him a friendly smile and offered him bread and water. Fearfully, Sifo clutched onto his suitcase. The gentle gaze of the man reassured him somewhat. Sifo was famished and scarcely had the strength to resist, so his anxiety soon gave way to an acceptance of the well-meant gesture. Eagerly, he began to eat and drink. The man invited him to come along with him, with the apology that his boss had probably caused him some troubles and wanted to make up for any damage done. Although Patro hardly ever received people at his home, Sifo was welcomed as a worthy guest, and he was offered a warm bath. The house was furnished in an austere manner, yet with great deal of taste and style. The early morning sun shone in through the windows above the staircase in the foyer, dancing like sunlight on ocean waves. In the warm bath his shoulders were massaged. Soothing oils flowed over his body. He was presented with bowls of fruit and salty lassi. Gradually Sifo found calm after his exhausting journey. His rags were replaced with stylish yet plain clothes. Sifo wondered who this very hospitable benefactor was. For a long time that had remained a mystery. Days went by as Sifo enjoyed the carefree serenity. The sweet smell of incense and flowers surrounded him. Every day fresh fruit and delicious meals were brought to his room. His life had never been so simple. He was resigned to the poverty that he knew. With old timepieces and all sorts of industrial scraps, he had developed mechanical objects that could help people. That had been his aim in life. Now that he was being provided with peace and quiet, he took the time to repair his damaged instruments. On the 8th day, he was invited to have lunch in one of the house's many rooms. Facing him from the other end of the table was his benefactor, Patro, the aristocrat with only one name. Patro listened closely to Sifo, who told him about his vibrating devices, and after a long silence, he came straight to the point. "A laboratory in town not far from here awaits you. My servants are yours." And then he stood up and left the room. Since then, Sifo had been working day and night in his laboratory on the refinement of his instruments and tried them out on monkeys before he would implant them in humans. Harmless experiments that posed little risk to the monkeys. He liked his monkeys and they were very fond of him. The monkeys were like family to him and wandered about freely in the laboratory. He called them his innovation army. The atmosphere in the laboratory was a cheerful one. Computers made all sorts of sounds and monkeys jumped all over the place. Some of them had been found nearly dead out on the street or in the forest. Sifo would rescue them and implant an appropriate model. By adjusting the resonance according to indications on the computer that was wirelessly connected to the implanted device, the critically ill monkey was revived within an hour. The innovation army danced around the recovering monkey, since they too had once been brought into the laboratory in a similar condition. Patro raised the foundling as if the child had been his own. As far as anyone knew, Patro wasn't married. He was a solitary man, a loner, who preferred to stay out of sight. He was struck by the innocence of this creature who seemed to be born of Mother Earth. After his vision, he knew he would call her Condamnita Sense Culpa, after the sound of leaves that he heard rustling during this dream. Condamnita was an extremely sensitive, high-strung and very intelligent child. Patro introduced her to the study of philosophy and practiced martial arts with her. He taught her about the beauty of art and showed her how ugliness could also be beautiful. He told her that opposites had the same origins and that these would sometimes lead more in one direction than in another. Good cannot exist without evil. The two stem from the same seed. Condamnita thus grew up in a sheltered, somewhat isolated environment. Patro educated the child for the most part on his own. Although Patro received no visitors, he did welcome some teachers on a weekly basis, but they had access only to the classroom specifically furnished with books, anatomical models, globes, and maps of the universe. The rest of the house was off limits to all. Condamnita knew no one her age and had no friends. Her teachers acquainted her with the outside world. Curious by nature, she began to ask more and more questions. Now and then she would spend hours peering out the window at a world that was totally foreign to her. Patro wanted to protect his daughter from that world full of conflict and danger. And, as is often the case when someone is being shielded from society, the protected person only becomes more curious about everything going on out there. In the early years, Patro would remain in the same room where his daughter was being educated. As she grew older, he began to withdraw to his library during these lessons. The physicist in particular was rather talkative and would go on at length about things that happened in town. Condamnita asked him an increasing number of questions which ultimately had little to do with physics. Excitably, the physicist told her about a young man who had once arrived in Kota Raksasa as a stowaway. He was about 13 years older than Condamnita and his name was Sifo, Rikan Sifo Abadan. With his inventions, he helped sick people. He had developed a technique involving implanted instruments that emitted vibrations. These would resonate through the body's cells, then the cells responded with a signal. When that signal was too weak, The instrument would send strong vibrations to the cells, which in turn began to oscillate more intensely. Due to this resonance being sent back and forth, the cells became stronger and the body livelier. Within the body, this gave rise to a concert of tones and a range of frequencies. Cells would develop new cells in response to the music being emitted from the little instrument. Monkeys, people, mice, and other animals that had given up long before could be seen regenerating. That young man, Sifo as he was called, was a genius. The technique that he used was so simple that it was incomprehensible that no one had come up with the idea before this. He placed a little orchestra in the body and let all the cells dance until one big party was taking place. The physicist told about Patro being impressed with young Sifo's technique and about his consequent offer of a laboratory where Sifo would be able to refine it. One day, Condamnita couldn't resist the urge to open the window and listen to the noise out on the street.